Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Tonight's class, of course, is the merit of all the Jewish people, especially those in the land of Israel, those who need help, rescuing, safety, everything that they need, God should give them. And if you'd like to sponsor a class, sponsorships are available. We really appreciate it. It helps us continue to do these classes. And let's jump right in. Okay. So this Shabbos, meaning tomorrow night, is the 15th day of the month of Av. It is a very special day. It is considered one of the happiest days in the Jewish calendar. And let's discuss what happened on this day, why it's such a special holiday. So the Talmud in the Gemara in Tainus, page 26b, says as follows. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, there were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th day of Av and as Yom Kippur, because these days, on these days, the daughters of Jerusalem will go out in white clothes, which each woman borrowed from one another. Why did they borrow? They did this so as not to embarrass those that did not have their own white garments. The daughters of Jerusalem will go out and dance in the vineyards. And what would they say? Young man, please lift up your eyes and see and choose for yourself a wife. Do not set your eyes towards beauty, but set your eyes towards a good family. As the verse states, grace is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears God, she shall be praised, as it says in Proverbs. Right? So, basically, these women would go out and dance, and men would come and pick them. That's why it was so joyous. That's what the Talmud says. Next, we have the Talmud in page 31a. And he goes through the details of how this, we said that they would borrow garments. We go through the details of how this occurred. It says as follows. The daughter of the king borrows the white garments and the daughter of the high priest. The daughter of the high priest borrows the daughter of the deputy high priest. And it goes on and on and on. And then the Gemara finishes off. Why would they borrow garments? They did this so as not to embarrass one who did not have her own white garments. So they wanted to make sure no one was embarrassed and they had to borrow garments. So everyone borrowed garments. What would the beautiful woman among them say? Set your eyes towards beauty, as a wife is only for her beauty. What would those of distinguished lineage say? Set your eyes towards family, as a wife is only for children. And what would the ugly ones say? Acquire your purchase for the sake of heaven, provide that you adorn us with golden jewelry after our marriage to beautify us. So, very interesting ceremony, again, that we find, and how all these women would all, say what was in their best interest, what was the thing that they brought to the table. And it sounds, though, very interesting, right? Why would Jewish women dancing and men picking them doesn't sound something that would be not just done but celebrated. So the Kolbo, he is one of a medieval rabbi. He explains as follows: this practice soon sounds shocking. Know that anyone who could afford to marry off their daughter wouldn't send her there. This custom was for women whose fathers weren't financially able to marry them off. If not for this practice, they would remain single until their hair turned white. So actually, the Kobo explains that this was not shocking because this was very important. It was necessary for this to happen in order for women who did not have financial means to make sure they got married. Now, why? What is the connection between the 15th day of Av and Yom Kippur? Again, if you remember, we said that the Talmud says the days that were joyous were Yom Kippur and the 15th day of Av. They say that both of these have elements of forgiveness. And what is the connection between the idea of forgiveness? Because it is this day, on the 15th day of Av, that the second luchos were given. So the second luchos were given in connection to the Jewish people being forgiven, and therefore it was the reason why the Yom Kippur is joyous is because that is the day that of course luchos were given. I apologize. And the 15th day of Av had 6 things that happened on it that were joyous. So let's go into what are the 6 things. Number 1 is that the tribes were allowed to marry into each other. What is the story of the tribes? So a few weeks ago in the Torah portion, we talked about the Benos Zelovchad, the daughters of Zelovchad, who their father passed away, leaving no sons, only 5 daughters. And the question was, what would happen to his portion in the land of Israel? So the daughters of Zelovchad went to Moses and they said, Moses, what is going to happen to our father's portion? And Moses talked to God. God says, you're right. It goes to the daughters. God wanted them to be the ones to bring this issue up. So therefore, they would give them the opportunity to show their love for the land of Israel. And of course, they were given their father's portion. However, there was a catch. The catch was that anyone who was given a portion in the land of Israel, at the end of the Yovel, at the end of the Jubilee year, the land, even if the land was sold, it would go back to the original tribe. And therefore, every tribe would keep its boundaries. And their tribe said, if the daughters of Salachad marry out of the tribe, then they are going to, when there will be from, let's say, they were from the tribe of Dan, if I'm not mistaken. And therefore, if they were to get married to someone, let's say, from the tribe of Ruvain, now Ruvain would have a portion in the land, and even at the end of the Yovel, it would go back to its original owners. And who is that? That's the tribe of Ruvain, because she married a tribe of Ruvain. The tribe goes by the husband. So they said, how could, if they go marry other people, it's going to be a problem. So Moses, again, consults God, and they say, guess what? You have to marry someone from your own tribe. Now, this was only for the first generation, as the Torah explicitly says. This is what God commanded to the daughters of Salachad. And they learned from that there was specifically to the daughters of Salachad, i.e., that generation that was the generation of the desert. And when was this commuted? This decree that daughters can only marry within their own tribe in order to keep the land in their tribe, that decree was gotten rid of on the 15th day of Av. Okay. Second decree that was nullified on the 15th day of Av was the decree that no one would marry into the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin, Benjamin, had a terrible situation recorded in the book of Shoftim, that there was a story of the Pilegesh Begiva, a woman who was mistreated and eventually murdered by the tribe of Benjamin. And because this act was something so I shouldn't say murdered or whatever it was a very long story. Let's leave it like that. But basically, long story short, is that the person who was victimized by the family that was victimized, they made sure that all the Jewish people knew what happened to her, and therefore that this tragedy happened at the hands of Benjamin, and therefore at the tribe of Benjamin, and therefore the Jewish people got together and they said, someone could be so cruel to do something to a Jewish woman like that, they are going to be banned from marrying into our tribes. And however, that was nullified. Also, that decree that not to marry into the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin was gotten rid of on the 15th day of Av. Now, what was the source for that? The source for that, when the rabbis and the judges at that time said that they should get rid of when they said that they should not marry into the tribe of Benjamin, they said we will not let them marry from us. They took that to mean that from us was specific, but not from our descendants. So that was that explanation. So we see the second thing that happened. So that ban was rescinded on the 15th day of Av. The next thing that happened on the 15th day of Av was the people stopped dying in the desert. After the story of the spies, the Jewish people were decreed to sit in the desert for 40 years, and every day on the 9th day of Av, the Jewish people would the people who had reached the age of 60 would dig their own graves, lie down, and they would not wake up in the morning. And this happened every single year for 38 years. And then at the 40th year, the people who turned 60 that year went, lie down in their own graves. Nothing happened. They woke up the next morning. And this happened. They said, maybe we miscalculated the moon. Maybe tonight really is the 9th of Av. So they tried again, and until they reached a full moon on the 15th day of Av, as is in the Jewish month, the 15th day is the full moon. They said, well, today is obviously no longer the 9th of Av for sure, and therefore they celebrated the fact that this decree that the entire generation of the Jewish people had to die before they could of the desert had to die before they would go into the land of Israel. That decree was rescinded. Another decree was that Hoshea ben Elah removed the blockades from going to Jerusalem. In the times of the kingdom of Israel, Yehoshaphat was the king of Israel. He banned Jewish people going to the temple because he didn't want them to leave his kingdom and to go to the kingdom of Judah where the temple was. So therefore, he put roadblocks, and he did much worse things. He built temples for idols. And Hoshea ben Elah rescinded this decree and rescinded the roadblocks to go to the temple on the 15th day of Av. The next thing happened was the people of Beitar, who were massacred in the times of the Second Temple, at the end of the Second Temple, or a little bit after, whatever exactly it was, the people of Beitar were massacred, and then the king would not allow them to be buried. And essentially, for many years, this lasted until he abused the bodies. It was a terrible tragedy. However, on the 15th day of Av, the decree was rescinded. A later king came, and he said that the people of Beitar were allowed to be buried, and it was miraculous that they actually found the bodies had not decomposed, and they were brought to burial. And the last thing is, on the 15th day of Av, that they would stop chopping wood for the altar in the temple. The 15th day of Av, which would be this Shabbos, as you know, we're now in the summer months in the northern hemisphere, as Israel is in the northern hemisphere, as we are in Minnesota. We are peak summer. The 15th day of Av is considered peak summer. From now on, it starts to get colder. Right? It's winter is just around the corner. Right? That's what a wonderful reminder. And because of that, there's more moisture in the air, and therefore the wood cannot dry out properly because there's no longer the hot sun. So therefore, they would stop chopping wood for the altar. Okay, so the question is, what is the connection between these six things? Right? We know that everything in Torah is not by chance. If this is such a happy day, and some of the things are pretty obvious, what's so exciting. Some things are a little bit, what does chopping wood have to do with allowing people to marry within other tribes? So let's get into it. The truth is that the connection is between all these different things is Jewish unity. That on the 15th day of Av, we see that is the theme of the 15th day of Av. There were times when the Jewish people had to not intermarry between tribes within the Jewish people, but with the tribe of Benjamin, for example. And these things were taken, these were removed. Now, there was a proper reason for that. We understand that there was a proper thing to do at that time. However, the Jewish people restored unity. Unity was restored amongst the Jewish people on this day. And they found something deeper within themselves. They could be united once again. And again, the similar thing when it comes to there was another division amongst the Jewish people. There was the division of the generations of the desert and the generations that were going to the land of Israel. And that barrier was broken also on the 15th day of Av. The people who were the generation of the desert stopped dying, and they became the people who were going to go into the land of Israel. So again, we see that Jewish unity. Again, removing the roadblocks. Very similar idea. That there was a barrier between the Jewish people trying to serve God, going to the temple in the kingdom of Israel versus the kingdom of Judah, and those roadblocks were removed, and people were allowed to once again worship God together. And we see that this unity was restored. And again, burying the dead of Beitar. The people of Beitar, they were the people who were in the next world. They were reunited with the people in the next world by being allowed to be buried. And they were, in other words, they were not allowed to be part of, like the Torah tells us, that we return to the dust. And that is what allows us to also be I'm trying to find the right word. Tchias HaMesim, revival of the dead. That's the word. Revival of the dead. That was going to happen when Mashiach comes. That part of that is that person has after they pass away, they are buried, and then they could become alive again. So, and therefore, this unity of the Jewish people being allowed to be buried, the dead of Beitar, united them with Tchias HaMesim, with resurrection of the dead and revival of the dead that's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So all the Jewish people were reunited. Specifically, also the people of Beitar. One of the reasons that it was one of the reasons that the Beitar was an interesting situation. Beitar actually was not destroyed by the temple when the temple was destroyed. It was destroyed a little bit after. Why? Because they celebrated the destruction of the temple, and therefore they were spared. Why did they celebrate the destruction of the temple? Because at that time, at the end of the Second Temple period, there was a lot of corruption going on, and there were people who were extorting people who were traveling to Jerusalem, And to make a long story short, the people felt that Jerusalem was the cause of all this extortion. People had to travel to Jerusalem for sacrifices for the mitzvah of going to the temple on the holidays, and they were being extorted. So people were saying, "I wish I never would have went to Jerusalem," and therefore the people of Beitar they sinned by rejoicing at the destruction of the temple. They said that's the end of corruption. But of course, that was not the correct response, and as a result, they eventually had this happen to them. And the fact that they were allowed to be buried shows that on a spiritual realm, they were reunited with the Jewish people. They had separated themselves from the Jewish people. The people of Beitar said, "We're not part of Judaism. We're happy that the temple, God forbid, was destroyed." And however, they were forgiven at some point. Many years later, they were forgiven to the point where the Jewish people all came together, and they were able to be reunited with the Jewish people. And lastly is the story of the wood that was chopped for the temple. The wood that was chopped for the temple there were different time periods when people were allowed to bring wood, and different families that were allowed to bring wood, and every family had their time that they were supposed to bring wood. So let's look at what the Talmud tells us in Tractate Tainus, page 28a. This is what happened. When the Jewish exiles returned during the time of the Second Temple, they found no wood available in the storehouses needed for the altar. Some families volunteered to donate wood for the altar. Thus, the prophets among them established, even if the designated chambers in the temple were filled with wood, these donors would continue to bring their contributions on those days. So in other words, that certain people were given, anybody could bring wood at these families because they had brought wood when there was no wood in the temple in the beginning of the Second Temple era. They were allowed to bring wood whatever they wanted. So we see that there was kind of a hierarchy. Now, the one thing the Talmud tells us is that, in fact, the people who were able to bring wood, some of these people were able to bring wood even after the 15th day of Av. Because again, 15th day of Av and on, it's harder to find dry wood. But if certain families were allowed to bring wood afterwards. However, so that would seem to be more valuable. And the Mishnah goes through all the dates when people are able to bring wood. However, the Mishnah says, what if somebody didn't know what tribe they're from? Don't forget, the Second Temple era is coming after a 70-year exile, and many people were, one of the things that Ezra and Nehemiah had to deal with was people, the issue of genealogy and who was who. People had forgotten. It was a whole generation of people who were outside the land of Israel, and people were being persecuted. And therefore, they didn't know exactly necessarily which tribes they were from. Many people had forgotten. So therefore, they just said as follows. On the 50th day of Av, anybody could bring wood. Anybody who didn't know what tribe they were from was allowed to bring wood on the 15th day of Av. So again, we see the unity amongst the Jewish people, that all these hierarchies, and they're very important. They're based on real things of family, legacy of charity, legacy of serving God, and all these important things. However, we see that Jewish unity could triumph over all these things. And no matter what situation a person is in, whether it's the wood chopping, wood donators, people who donated wood, or it was the girls who would all borrow garments from each other to make sure everybody was on the same level, we see how important Jewish unity is, and how this is therefore it is one of the happiest days on the Jewish calendar. And it is no coincidence that this follows the 9th day of Av by just about a week, right? Tisha B'Av was this Sunday, and the 15th Av is this Shabbos. So within a week, we have these 2 days, because the 9th day of Av, the reason the tragedies of Tisha B'Av happened is because of lack of Jewish unity, as we kind of talked about, right? How people were kind of put on divisions, and therefore they sinned, and therefore Jewish unity fell apart, and God took away the temple from us. And the way to restore it is through the opposite. And through the 15th day of Av starts that correction period, where now we have to focus on Jewish unity. And no matter what the differences may be, whether they are real or imagined, we must be united as one as we walk towards Mashiach, maybe speedily in our days. Have a good Shabbos. We'll see you next time.